So I was thinking, as you were talking, I mean, a lot about, I work at a school and I work with a lot of young boys, so just thinking about what their journeys must be. And part of my curiosity with this conversation, like I was telling you earlier, was also that, like, to have someone older sort of talk about their younger experiences, for me to have um, some insight into what it's like to be maybe an adolescent teenager sort of grappling with this, And I remember this conversation that I was having about heartbreak with, I had them individually with boys, and then in a group I wanted to ask them together, because I also sense this thing that they have these conversations with me, but they are not able to support each other. Even when sometimes they have individual conversations with me, they are all in the part of the same friend group. So I asked them these questions in a group, and it was like just them pulling each other's leg and saying, oh, we would just ask you to forget it and take you out, and if we could, and all of that, and to not take it so seriously and move on, and right, like so I was thinking about this. I think a lot about this difference and how to make it possible even to have conversations with groups of boys and girls, maybe. I mean, but yeah, and I don't know what's your experience been around that, and how have you lived that?
Yeah, I think I still sort of struggle with that, and in a group of like male friends where none of them or like very few of them are expressive or allow themselves to be vulnerable, it is still difficult for me to allow myself to be vulnerable and express myself. I think very few groups of friends, male friend groups of mine, where I can be vulnerable, but still I just can't be vulnerable to the extent that I am with my therapist or with my partner. So there's always that distinction. But when there's a female in the group, then I feel sort of more comfortable. And I think the sort of male conversations makes for a really interesting sort of observation, because and again, when I see this, I'm not sort of trying to say that I'm not a part of it, because sometimes I'm a part of it as well, where like 5 boys, 5 men talking about a certain issue, and the typical masculine conversation is that you talk about everything in the world, like what's happening in the US, what's happening in India, what's happening Brexit, post-Brexit. You talk about the economic policies of Singapore, refugee problem, again, COVID responses in all the different parts of the world, and you talk about KPOLI and BSAT and whatever, but you don't talk about yourself. Because when you ask, oh, how's your life going on? Oh, good. That's it. There's nothing. So you talk about everything in the world except yourselves, and that happens all the time. You just constantly like trying to pull each other's legs, and I am a part of the problem as well, because I engage in those kinds of conversation as well, and it is fun at times, and at least the thing that I try to do in my capacity is to not normalize any form of conversation that stereotypes any community or sort of demeans any community, including men themselves. So I think that is something that I try to do, but it is, I think, very interesting, and I sort of at times when I think of the past conversations where I used to have like 5 men with their own egos, and they're trying to discuss a certain issue, and everybody thinks they're right. Nobody thinks they're wrong. Like someone starts talking about, I felt really sad when I lost my grandmom, and the other person immediately interrupts, no, I felt really sad when I lost my pet as well. And the other person, like with no context, no, I felt really sad when I went to the US and couldn't adapt to the situations. So they're like competing even in terms of their grief. They're competing each other's griefs and trying to prove that their grief was more painful than the others. So now I find it amusing in so many different ways, because I see them competing in a lot of things. But I have also seen the sort of changes as well, when there's at least 1 or 2 people willing to listen to what they have to say and and then that sort of in turn gradually makes them so curious to know what the others are going through. And that has been beautiful, to be honest. I have a few group of friends, only male friends, and we do Zoom sessions. We were thinking of starting a podcast at one point of time, but after COVID, we're trying to do regular Zoom sessions, and we allow ourselves to be vulnerable. And I can think of the first conversation we had and the conversation we have right now, where we discuss everything, but also ourselves. And that, I think, has been beautiful. And something that I've come to terms with is that when we talk about masculinity, or even when we talk about toxic masculinity and things that are deemed toxic masculine traits, based on the conversations that I've had, and this is based on the traits that I have that are deemed toxic masculine, there are certain traits that just cannot be eliminated entirely, but can only be harnessed. So I think these conversations can help harness those toxic traits. And when you say toxic masculinity, it is not just toxic for the people around them, but it is toxic for themselves, because they're living with themselves all the time. And they're being self-destructive and toxic to themselves all the time, and when they don't have others to be toxic to. So I think these are the kinds of conversations that now we have, and has been beautiful in so many ways, and in a way therapeutic as well, because we're being aware of our own characteristics and trying to sort of find ways to change them, and also find ways to retain some of those beautiful traits that we have.
So when you say harness those traits, what does that look like?
So I think there's two different analogies, and there's one particular analogy that I really find relatable is, I think, Roger Moore, who talks about taming the bull, who says that the way we've been socialized, the way men have been socialized, and that there are certain traits in the psyche itself. It's very subconscious. You can consciously unlearn certain aspects of your identity, but the ones that are in your subconscious, that obviously requires more effort and requires different kinds of approaches. And sometimes you can only tame the bull, and you can't sort of get rid of the bull. And for the first step is obviously you have to be aware that these are not just toxic to others, but also yourself. When you're constantly being angry, when there's a lot of anger in you, and you're trying to constantly find people to be angry at, when you don't find those people, you're being angry at yourself. You're being self-destructive. You're trying to do things. You're trying to harm yourself in so many ways. And also when you're being angry at others, which means that you will not have a meaningful relationship, because all your relationships will be marred with these toxic aspects. And I think that realization is one way of harnessing that toxic energy. That bull will still be there, and it's just identifying scenarios and circumstances and aspects where it sort of brings the worst out of you, and trying to avoid those scenarios and circumstances. I guess there's obviously these layers behind these toxic masculine traits, which I think some of them can be completely eliminated, yes, but some of them need to be harnessed. And also, not just about talking toxic masculinity, but masculinity in general per se, needs to be sort of nourished, and also at times cherished as well, some aspects of it, and not talking about toxic masculine ideals. And that is something that is never taught as well. You're always taught to abide by a certain masculine ideal, but never what feels right for you, or what sort of resonates with you, and what makes you feel positive. And that is something that is an interesting conversation itself. And I feel like I've found some positive aspects of masculinity that I can relate to as well. But not everyone has that privilege.
I have so many questions in my mind.
So I went on. Okay.
No, but when you were talking about this harnessing of some of the traits, I was thinking that this one young boy I was having a conversation with spoke about something similar to that, about talking about Hulk in Endgame. I don't know if you've seen the Avengers Endgame, and Hulk manages to, like sort of keep that anger self and his scientist self sort of together in the same body, right? Like, and he was talking about how that was what he wanted, he wanted to be able to have that sort of, find that sort of balance between, like to find this balance between what he thought was maybe anger, and which was coming also from hurt, and also this sort of the tender part that was hurting, and sort of have both of those together, and not let that anger be like show against people that he cared about, and it was a conversation that was very meaningful, like, for me. So I wanted to ask you about your then personal experience of how you live these things, even thinking about the fact that I might have done harm and I cannot do anything to change that, right? But, or I might have experienced this privilege and I might have benefited from this system that oppresses other people, and I cannot sort of change what happened, but how does then accountability look for you in your life with that knowledge of that?
I think I've probably made peace with the fact that I can't change what I've done in the past, and I sort of ascribe very strictly to these certain values of postmodern feminism, and where the first step is to obviously acknowledge and accept all the privileges that I have, and I am still in that process. It's a very long process. But just acknowledging and accepting is not enough. The next step is to use my privileges in a way that sort of, in social justice, or in a way that tries to challenge the power structure, sort of challenges the oppression, and does and contributes in any way to create a sort of parity and remove the oppression. So, and when I say this, and there's this binary between allies and oppressor, and I don't think you can be an ally and you can be an oppressor at the same time. So, and I certainly try to be an ally, acknowledging the fact that all of my actions might not sort of contribute to the feminist movement or to eliminate casteism or racism. So, because I do not have that lived experience of a female-bodied person, or I do not have the lived experience of someone from the Dalit community or from the Black community. So even my attempts of being an ally are bound to have many mistaken activities. They might be well-intentioned, but I am bound to make those mistakes. And I think acknowledging the fact that I will make those mistakes, and I need to learn from those mistakes, and when I'm called out, when I make those mistakes, I need to accept it, learn from it, constantly seek advice, constantly have conversations with people from those communities without using their emotional labor, because I cannot exploit their emotional labor for my self-awareness. So there's a lot of reading, introspection required, but even after having done all of that, there will be mistakes. And the only way I don't make mistakes is if I don't try. If I continue staying silent or not doing anything about it, is the only way I don't make mistakes. So, and I think the levels of accountability is not, the forms of accountability is not, I can't hold myself accountable for all of them. Maybe for some I can, but I think in my way open to any forms of feedback, backlash, or open to being called out, and I think that's the way I think about it. and I have been called out many a times. I try to see the value in that, the positives in that, and acknowledge that I've made a mistake.
It's hard to think of ourselves as people who can make mistakes, forget my cause harm.
Yeah, I think there's this messiah complex that most of us have, and the ones that are working on the social justice movement, and there's this messiah complex that we have to be perfect, that we have to, look at, we are not allowed to make these mistakes, and if we do, we need to sort of hold ourselves accountable, and maybe question ourselves, or sort of find a different way to support or be a part of the movement.
Yeah.
And that is, I think, and I personally believe that is a very unfair burden that we put on ourselves, because not everyone has that. I don't think anyone has that capability, and everyone probably does is in a way is well intentioned. And the consequences obviously don't work out the way they intended. There's obviously a lot of things that they could have done better, but I think delving into the counterfactual does more harm than good.
I think it's that we're always finding new ways to new ways of negotiating and renegotiating with our own values, and right, like it's also changing.
And just the fact that accepting that it will change, and the values that whenever we look back ourselves, even at any stage of life, when we look back ourselves like 5 years back, there will be a lot of things that we would have wished we did differently, but there's nothing we can do about it. And this, I think this constant sort of, we constantly seek some form of validation of our actions as well. And I've constantly grappled with that, where I try to seek validation from different communities, and managing that expectation is always very difficult. And very recently, I've come to terms that the only validation that I need or require is from myself. I think I need to hold those standards. That sort of closure has helped me a lot.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've also found that it is important actually to have community, right? Like, I mean, I know you're not saying that that's not, but I feel in the process of accountability of doing that, sometimes we can't do it for ourselves. And I think we do need people with whom we can have, for us, it's very like in the profession somehow, it's already there in the, like say you have supervision or something like this, which is I think a process of solidarity and accountability with, holding us accountable to the work that we are doing and the people we are trying to care for or help. And so I feel for me that has been really, really important. I think I would not be able to, even though a lot of the thinking and work I did, reading and like you were saying, right, like a lot of it has been that, but I think if I did not have some people to have conversations with who would not judge that process that I was having, it would have been difficult. Yeah, so I'm really grateful for people who have allowed that. No, I just wanted to say I think thank you for this conversation, which I think is difficult, and it does, just to be able to have an authentic, somewhat vulnerable conversation is, thank you.